I don't have many occasions to correct Dr. Rome. I just wanted to mention these two things. It's $81.3 million. and it actually resides in Lenny's desk. So what is the Clinical and Translational Science Institute? Really what we're charged with is taking discoveries in laboratories, bringing those to clinical trials, and then to communities. And so this is the infrastructure for bringing UCLA discoveries to patient care and communities. And so the NCI created this funding mechanism, the CTSI program, to provide this infrastructure with knowledge that some of our old systems really don't serve us well or adequately. For many years, 37 in fact, UCLA has had an inpatient GCRC, or a General Clinical Research Center, and there's a great deal of important research that has come from that, most recently and currently led by Ysidro Saluski. But in fact, it was recognized that we really needed to focus on outpatient and community-based research while continuing inpatient research as well. So there were new efficiencies to be gained by this. In addition, individual investigators historically work alone, sometimes called silos in individual laboratories, and it was recognized that team science was important. And also, in addition to that team science, the capacity to train in clinical and translational team science. And probably in the future, most importantly, that individual academic medical centers needed a way to link up, and particularly in clinical science, but also in translational and laboratory investigations, that this will be very important. And I'll show you some examples of that. So the national program, which is called the Clinical and Translational Science Award Program, and that's distinguished from our institute, which is the CTSI, is a national program that supports a consortium of medical research institutions, such as our own, designed to transform medical research in the United States. This is a map of the 60 sites in the US, and you'll notice that the red triangles denote the new centers this year, and ours, fortunately, is here in Los Angeles, in Southern California.
Where's my reserve seat?
Your reserve seat. This is the father of translational lung cancer research here at UCLA. Looking for some. Okay. Okay. So the goals of the CTSI are to create an academic home for clinical and translational science that builds upon UCLA's many strengths as well as its partners. And how are we doing that? We have an Office of Investigative Services where all of us can go to find our way around the resources at UCLA. And in addition to that real office, we have what's called a virtual home. You can contact those through the extension for CTSI. We were fortunate that number wasn't taken. And through the website, www.ctsi.ucla.edu. And I can give you an example of what the virtual home page looks like if you go to that. So you can see here that this interface lets you become aware of the resources, and we currently have this situated for researchers, patient volunteers or subjects, as well as trainees. This is a website in development, but contains a lot of information about funding resources, current events that are relevant at UCLA, and importantly, accomplishments. So I encourage you all to take a look at that and familiarize yourself with what's available. Our second goal is to build transdisciplinary research teams, and we think the best way to do that is to fund team science grants. And so coming up later at the beginning of the calendar year, at the end of this calendar year, we'll be having requests for applications go out for large team funding grants that will be transdisciplinary in nature, and cross our partner institutions. Career development is an important goal, and the way in which we're accomplishing that new career development is to have new training programs and new curricula. And we're expanding what are called bidirectional academic community partnerships to ensure that UCLA discoveries meet community needs. So bidirectional community engagement research is an important focus of what we're doing, and that's encompassed in our community engagement program. And finally, we're serving as a national resource through multiple interinstitutional collaborations, and I'll describe some of those for you. So our initiatives including speeding translation from laboratory discoveries to patient treatments, and there are a number of obstacles in that, and we'll show some examples of how we're trying to overcome that, to engage communities, as I mentioned, and to train a new generation of clinical and translational researchers. This is our organizational structure. And you'll see that we are related not only to the medical school, but to the entire campus. We have an internal advisory board chaired by 2 vice chancellors, and an external advisory board will be composed of experts, both academic and industry experts from around the country. And especially noted on this organizational chart is a committee on maternal, child, and adolescent health that's directed by Neil Halfon, Shirin Davaskar, and Michael Liu. Our Executive Oversight Committee really has representation from the directors of each of the program areas, and I'll briefly describe some of those for you now. These program areas serve as the infrastructure for what we need to try to accomplish and have provided for investigators in translational science. They include, and I'll describe for you, translational technologies, which are access to cores throughout the campus, evaluation and tracking, which actually evaluates and tracks everything that we do, headed by Pamela Davidson, a program area devoted to biostatistics, clinical data management, and trial design, headed by Robert and David Elishoff, an education and career development program that contains a number of new funding mechanisms directed by Carol Mangione. The pilot and collaborative research funding, where all those big dollars sit with Dr. Rome. The Office of Investigative Services, which is led by Stan Corman and Lori Shaker-Irwin. And this is the office in which we have direct people to UCLA resources in a number of ways for clinical translational science. I'll describe the community engagement research program to you in just a moment. The biomedical informatics program is an important and large one, and is our access to important research data repositories, to education in informatics, and training. This is headed by Art Toga and Doug Bell. The Clinical and Translational Research Center, which is now here on the B level and will be opening shortly. I have some pictures of that for you to let you know the infrastructure for that. It's a new 23-hour center for outpatient research. So what are the translational technologies? We have many cores here on campus, and we're working on a new database to link those cores to scientific teams so we know what's available. And we're developing funding mechanisms so particularly new investigators and assistant professors can have access to those cores most readily. And so there are nearly 200 cores at UCLA and our partner institutions. And we're developing ways to make access to those cores easier to do. I have one example of a core here that Marcelo Coto has given us, and this is his slide, and I'm happy he's here today because the detailed questions you can direct right to him. This is an important state-of-the-art expertise and facility we have here at UCLA under his direction for animal studies for FDA approval and important aspects of particularly the drug development program. The pilot and collaborative research funding really funds particularly this year, junior investigators, and as we proceed, both junior investigators and team science working together. And you're going to see much more coming out about this in the near future. The community engagement research program is one that really helps us build and strengthen the bidirectional partnerships that we need with our community in Los Angeles County. This bidirectional relationship includes not only us bringing UCLA ideas and research to the community, but hearing from the community about their needs. And we have a number of people who have a great deal of expertise in this area, and Arlene Brown and Keith Norris from Charles Drew head this program for us. Well, we have as our mission in this community outreach a vision to enhance the health of Los Angeles and our Los Angeles community. And how are we doing that? We're creating this institute to bring UCLA innovations and resources to bear on the greatest needs in Los Angeles. We have both obstacles and opportunities in Los Angeles County. We're a very large and diverse population. So if Los Angeles County were a state, we would be 7th or 8th in size of total population. We have 88 cities, more than 4,000 square miles. There's over 100 languages spoken here, and most people in the county don't speak English at home. There's great disparities in economics and as well as in health. And there's a marked difference depending upon where one lives in the county in terms of life expectancy. And so this pie graph shows this lack of an ethnic majority and the diversity within our county. And so we've taken this entire map to be our canvas in which to improve health. That's a pretty daunting task, and I assure you we won't be able to do that for the 10 million people here in the first year. However, we've created projects, one of which is the 70 block project headed by Arlene Brown and others. And it's an initiative to study how we might be able to make healthy communities in neighborhood initiatives. And this is a place-based intervention to identify and address the health and social needs of families in this area in South Los Angeles, and to improve outcomes and study those outcomes in these 5 specific domains you see here. We're partnered with both community partners and with Charles Drew at Harbor UCLA in this activity, and we're identifying health screening and specific needs for this community. You'll be hearing more about this from our community engagement researchers in the near future. But we're also aware that UCLA has a health system that is spreading and has spread throughout Los Angeles. And our long-term goal is to really create not only clinical care in these areas, but to have clinical research infrastructure in these areas as well. Well, the Clinical and Translational Research Center is a new center here, as I mentioned, on the B level, that contains all of our ambulatory activity, and will when it opens next month, in the Clinical and Translational Research Center, which was formerly our GCRC. We have private rooms for research, a large amount of square footage. If any of you visit there, you won't recognize the old emergency room that was here in CHS previously. There is a clinical and research sleep center there, and as I mentioned, there's a 23.5-hour capacity. So this is our signage in front. You'll recognize that you're at UCLA because the first thing we ask you to do is pay for parking. And this is viewed from the parking structure. As you walk in, this is the front door to get in, and you'll see in the front hallway we have conference rooms. We have an area outside where people can relax and collect their thoughts, and an area inside where people can work intensively. This is an area for both nursing staff and physicians to do charting. We have, as I mentioned, more than 20,000 square feet of space. We have state-of-the-art procedure rooms and clinical and research rooms. There's an infusion center and a work area. And I show you this picture in particular because at the end of this picture you see a dumbwaiter that leads directly upstairs to A level to this laboratory, which is headed by our colleagues in Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, by Tony Butch, under the auspices and agreements with John Braun in Pathology, in which we'll be doing both CLIA certified and research level tests that will be important for clinical investigation. So what are some examples of what we're doing and why we're proceeding in this manner? And I've taken as an example, for some reason, lung cancer prevention and early detection. And really what we're investigating and what we consider to be our domain, to be from molecules to society. And that's an ambitious domain, but we have a lot of help. There are many strengths at UCLA in each of these areas. And in the example I'll show you, we're looking at what are termed biomarkers of lung cancer development in the blood. And the clinical evaluation for early detection is a CT scan and perhaps new blood tests to help those CT scans become more accurate. And then we have important community programs in cancer survivorship and smoking cessation. You'll notice that education and career development is woven through the entire matrix of laboratory research, clinical research, and community engagement. So what are the problems with this matrix as it now stands? Well, we need to have this be bidirectional, and we need to be able to establish teams that communicate with one another across the spectrum of these problems. But one of the biggest problems now is that, on average, the development of a drug or a test from the laboratory to clinical fruition and community implementation takes about 17 years. And certainly, I don't want to see this because Dr. Holmes and I will be retired in 17 years. And what we'd like to see is really to be able to speed this. I knew I could count on you, Matt. So what I wanted to explain to you a little bit about is how we are teaming together to take care of these first two aspects in particular. So why are we focused on this disease? Well, one of the things we did in planning this proposal, and I should say that John Adams is here, and he's one of the thought leaders that helped us come to our overall goals in this. But we have leading causes of premature death in Los Angeles County by ethnicity in this table. And I was quite struck by this when I saw this published last fall. Because in fact, there's great disparity. And as we studied this, of course, we looked at this as being a large number of, in a sense, preventable problems that we may not be addressing adequately. And as you may know, we're focused on the latter part of these diseases in many instances, and we pay very little attention to their prevention. However, there are excellent research programs in prevention and early detection of these diseases and prevention, and some of them relate to, for example, the work of Michael Rodriguez in preventing violence in teenagers and children, and in injury prevention, and that's related to motor vehicle accidents. So lung cancer, you'll notice, is high on the list throughout. And why is it important nationally? Well, it's the cause of more than 160,000 deaths in the United States each year. That's a death every 3 minutes in this coming year. It causes more death than breast, prostate, colon, liver, kidney, and skin cancers combined. And the 5-year survival rates for lung cancer compared to the other common cancers are very low. So one way that we can think of to change this record is to detect lung cancer early so that the cancers can be removed by surgery. One of the fortunate findings in the recent literature, that is this year in the New England Journal, is a paper authored by our colleague Denise Aberle that showed that CT scans can reduce lung cancer mortality by 20%. However, we still need to define if an abnormality on a scan is benign or malignant. That is, in this particular chest CT, we don't know whether this circled abnormality is benign or malignant. So to answer this, we need new blood tests. And so the question is benign or malignant, and answer, can we do something non-invasively to help us make that determination? In order to do that, investigators are studying normal, what are termed epithelial cells, and these epithelial cells can be genetically modified so that they, in the laboratory, begin to form cancer, and then we can look for the proteins that are made by these cells in the experiments and then in the blood of our patients. So this is a way in which we're linking laboratory discovery to interactions with those doing imaging studies, and further in the program to bring this to community, along with, of course, smoking cessation programs, which will be very important in prevention. So I've told you about the national consortia, and that's a very important 60-center group of CTSA sites across the country. We meet frequently. We just came back, several of us, from the meeting in Washington, D.C., with the other 60 centers. And there are a number of important initiatives that are proceeding nationwide. And in addition to those nationwide initiatives, what this map shows is the regional consortium. We're part of the West Coast Consortium, along with the institutions that you might be able to see here: University of Washington, Oregon Health Sciences, Davis, UCSF, Stanford, UCLA, Scripps, and San Diego. But we've also formed something new, which is called UC BRAID. It's an organization of the UC, that's the University of California, CTSAs. And BRAID stands for the Biomedical Research Acceleration, Integration, and Development Program. Several of us lobbied for a shorter name and lost. But this group consists of the CTSAs at Davis, San Diego, San Francisco, Irvine, and Los Angeles. And we've begun to tackle problems related to master contracting among us, informatics, and human studies approvals, or IRBs. So we've made some progress in each of these areas. I wanted to give you a couple of examples of that. A new initiative that's just begun is on drug discovery and development. And in this initiative, we'll be identifying drug discovery infrastructure at each of the campuses and trying to make that be available to all of the campuses. And we have a future initiative that's being planned in harmonizing biobanking and beginning to use modern biobanking at each campus. And there's a specific reason for that. And that is, in the informatics area, we've developed something called UC Rex, or UC Research Exchange. And this is funded from UCOP, and it addresses this problem. We show here in this cartoon an investigator starting a clinical trial at UCLA. But as happens, and is happening more and more, as we learn more about genetics and people's genomes and disease genetics, that what we thought of as many common diseases are actually very, very many subcategories of those common diseases. So we have, in fact, the necessity to test large numbers of people with a given disease to be able to demonstrate efficacy, for example, of a therapy. Well, what's an example of that? In the example we just showed you about lung cancer, it's now been appreciated that, in fact, lung cancer is not a one disease or two by histologic examination, but in fact, it may be as many as 15 to 20 diseases based upon genetics. And drugs are being developed to each of those different genetic abnormalities. Some of those genetic abnormalities only occur in 3 or 4% of lung cancer patients. So in order to do trials that get the right drugs to the right patients, we need many, many patients, many more than even come to UCLA. So how will this investigator approach this problem and effectively contribute to medical science? Well, what we're developing is a research data repository that really links the research data repositories at all the UC academic medical centers. The research data repositories is that research information that will come from our electronic medical records that investigators can gain access to, first by IRB approval, of course, and with de-identified information. So on the time frame, on the timeline for UC Research Exchange, or UC Rex, is that this year, rather next year at this time, an investigator will be able to sit here at UCLA at their computer and identify all of the patients in the UC system that are relevant for their particular trial. And so that's a very important aspect, because when the research data repository is complete, it will encompass 12 to 15 million patients rather than just the patients we see here at UCLA. As we progress in the development of UC Research Exchange, the investigators will be able to access more and more complicated information about those patients. And eventually what we'll be able to do is actually not just identify them, but send a letter to that academic medical center that gets to the patient's physician, so that the patient then can be informed by their physician that there's a study available for them for their disease. And in addition to that, because we're harmonizing the IRBs and we're having master contracting and this integrated research data repository, those patients who reside at Davis, San Francisco, Irvine, and San Diego will actually be able to enroll in those trials at their physician's offices. So we'll be creating a new face through this informatics program, so that the UC campuses, although they're plural now, and we envision ourselves competing with each other in football and basketball, we're actually a united university addressing the major medical problems that our patients face. I wanted to remind you that this is our website, we're really in the business of taking scientific discovery to knowledge and to practice. And what I like to tell our trainees when I'm on rounds is everything that we're doing today in terms of medical care is really defined by scientific discovery. That the only reason that we can call ourselves the best in the West is that we bring discoveries to our patients. And the only way for that to happen, the only way for our next generation of physicians and clinicians to know how to practice at the cutting edge, is for us to do successful scientific investigation today. And that happens at every level. It could be molecules, it could be a clinical investigation or community engagement, but it's critical for our advancement in clinical care, and we have that at UCLA. So because this is an administrative meeting with a few guests, other guests, I wanted to particularly note a couple of things. First, that the reason that we have this NIH funding is really the contribution of literally hundreds of people working together to put this proposal together in the past, not just 1 year, but 5. And I wanted to make a special note of our research design team, several of you here in the room, who actually stayed with us and wrote this 1,600-page document. We finished, actually, if you remember, on the day that the Chilean miners actually exited from their mine last year. And I wrote to the dean to say that everyone is fine, that the research writing team exited from their room on the first floor of CHS. The light was awfully bright, but we were happy to get the proposal in the box. Now, since that time, we have continued to have hundreds of people work on this, both here at Cedars, at Charles Drew, and at Harbor. And our central administration is here. I want to introduce them to you. And I don't know if Ann, Matt, Denise, Emily, Jessica, Nicole, Lauren's not here today, but if you could just stand. I wanted to mention that Ann Skinner is our new administrative director, and we're very pleased to have you. And also, after these presentations, people often come up to me and say, when could you give me a lesson in PowerPoint? And my honest answer is I can't, because Jessica Byrne made these slides. And so she's to be given all that credit. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.